As the towering walls of the Earth Kingdom's fortress of a city fell behind him, Aang breathed in the new metropolitan air. The air of a city of a people who had worn through an age-old war, and the air of the last safe haven against the onslaught. The vast spread of houses and markets was a motley of green, yellow and brown, woven together with a smoky haze that hung above. In the distance, the stony monoliths of the inner wall loomed. As she looked upon it all, Katara then knew. She had never known a city till she saw Ba Sing Se. The moment when Team Avatar enters Ba Sing Se, like plenty of moments throughout Avatar The Last Airbender, is fantastic. Because one of the things the show always did incredibly well was building a real sense of place. That no town or settlement was a generic backdrop, and that each nation felt distinctly cultured, but never coloured with a single shade. You can thank Samuel for this video topic, who chose it as his Patreon perk, and if you would like to suggest a video of your own, then there's a link to my Patreon down in the description below. It would mean the world for you to support me, even if just for $1 a month. Also, there's going to be a Discord soon, so if you want to be part of that, then Patreon it up. There are dozens of facets to effective world building, from religions to social structure to architecture, but this is not an on-writing video where we would usually break down those individual components. So today we'll be taking a look at a very specific element of world building in Avatar The Last Airbender. How its map and geography affects the way the Earth Kingdom has been world built, from its politics, to its social structure, to its economy. Welcome to one of the longest videos I have ever made, at 2,900 words. Why do I do this to myself? The Earth Kingdom's political landscape arises naturally from its immense size. When looking at the world map, it dwarfs the second largest nation, the Fire Nation, in both population and landmass, let alone comparing it to the Water Tribes, which essentially comprise a couple of cities as they don't occupy much of their northern and southern icy wastes. And the fundamental factor that plays into this is that the larger the kingdom, the more difficult it becomes to govern. Logistically, ruling a nation requires three important things that we'll talk about. 1. A direct flow of information to the central authority. 2. A unified militaristic body to enforce the laws and collect taxes for the central authority. And 3. A way to keep the local politics in line with that central authority. And the Earth Kingdom's geography creates some unique challenges for each of these three things. Most prominently, as said before, the larger the landmass, the more difficult it becomes to govern. Firstly, the transfer of information becomes a lot slower, meaning that the central authority, here being Ba Sing Se, making decisions for distant lands becomes delayed or even ineffectual when they require urgent intervention. The intelligence organization for the throne, known as the Dai Li, are only described as
the cultural authority of Ba Sing Se. They are the guardians of all our traditions.
But only Ba Sing Se. They don't seem to have much influence outside that particular province, and I think that reflects this problem with information. It would be too slow and ineffectual for them to really bother. 2. Keeping a unified militaristic body designed to enforce that central authority's laws and collect their taxes becomes a lot more difficult, as the Earth Kingdom is essentially in the feudal era, meaning that the local militia designed to do these things are pulled from the populace that they're protecting. Making them more loyal to the crown that they've never met than they are to their local leaders would require a huge amount of influence, whether it be a strong control of resources or a high increase in pay for working for that central authority. We actually see this idea referenced in the episode The Earth Queen, where she says,
"But what's left of my kingdom is falling to ruin. Roving bands of barbarians are raiding villages in the countryside, and now some of my subjects are refusing to pay their taxes."
And later on, we get the other side of the coin.
You're on the wrong side of this fight, Avatar! That gold belongs to the people, not the Queen!
There, Ba Sing Se were forced to send their own forces to collect their tax money, because the local militia wasn't willing to put their lives on the line for a monarch that they had never met, and it seems that the people were taking it into their own hands. But what's interesting is that we can look at how Kuvira planned to unite all of the Earth Kingdom provinces, how she planned to get around these difficulties with the geography. When she brought the state of Yai under her banner, she required loyalty.
Proclaim your loyalty, if you wish to keep your post.
But maintaining that control over these remote provinces required more than a pledge of loyalty.
I've heard how you help towns, by conquering them.
We see that she manages to maintain that central authority by keeping careful control of resources that these towns and provinces need, without which they may either fall behind economically or, in the worst case, starve.
I know the only reason you want this region is because it's rich in ore.
And your pride certainly will not feed your hungry when all that is left is rubble.
Kuvira managed to maintain a sophisticated system of control to surmount the scale of its landmass, in a way that the Earth Kingdom monarchs hadn't ever done previously. Part of the reason for this was trains, because trains revolutionized our world during the Industrial Revolution, with the quick transfer of information, resources, and militaristic force. But this isn't a breakdown of Kuvira's Earth Empire, as fascinating as that would be. No, the main point is that the Earth Kingdom didn't have those things. It didn't have trains to allow for the mobility of information, resources, and military force required for that sort of political cohesion. And without that capability, it needed to resort to a decentralized system of power. Given its immense size, the Earth Kingdom was split up into 58 states, give or take a few as to whether we count the United Republic and Zaofu and the like, although it probably wasn't split up into the states as we see in Legend of Korra.
I'm sorry, Rava. I've failed to bring peace. Even with Vatu locked away, darkness still surrounds humanity.
It's likely that the provinces previously exist, but they were drawn together by the strongest of them through a warring period. And we'll talk more about why Ba Sing Se was the strongest of them a little bit later. And these provinces are relatively independent politically, as we know from the extras in the episode Avatar Day. In the Earth Kingdom, there is no universal court system, which becomes clear enough because when Aang is facing a trial, Tong says,
Evidence? That's not how our court system works. I say what happened, and then you say what happened, and then I decide who's right.
and each town just makes it up. But I do want to highlight how unusual this is. Having no centralized system of law really shows how decentralized the power in the Earth Kingdom really is. That is generally expected to be one of the fundamental tenets of political cohesion, but it doesn't have it. And the reason does come back to geography. Obviously, enforcing a body of law across a continent of this size would be incredibly resource heavy and logistically difficult. But it's also because of the cultural diversity that bringing people together across a landmass of this size would mean. Not every town would feel like criminals deserve to be
boiled in oil.
Instead, a sort of federal system makes a large landmass much easier to govern, as allowing local bodies to rule is more efficient and more stable, as locals understand their needs better than a central government would. Especially with an absolute monarch, the more people that you have to dictate to, the more likely some of them will rebel. So the less you try and dictate to them, the less likely they are to rebel. And that's why I think they don't seem to have a unified body of laws. Essentially, stability across the whole continent. I say this coming from a country with a government with practically no separation of powers. I mean, Montesquieu would be spewing.
I am the Senate.
And we can see this in how the monarch's power is essentially null outside Ba Sing Se. Their decrees are only ever referenced as having power within the city, with a few exceptions like conscription. But the difficulty of governing a landmass of this size is compounded by a number of geographical factors. Foremost, the Siwong Desert, which is described in the following way.
I'm afraid that desert's impossible to cross.
We get varying descriptions of how large the Siwong Desert is, but the most accurate one is probably the map we see used in the episode The Library, spanning from Omashu to the Eastern Sea, essentially covering nearly a third of the Earth Kingdom territory. And the important thing about the Siwong Desert is that it essentially creates an impenetrable natural barrier between the northern half of the continent, most importantly the central authority Ba Sing Se, and the southern half. To tie this back into our centralized body of laws, it would be incredibly difficult for the Earth Kingdom to bring a force down into the south to confront any city or town that really disobeys its declarations, its decrees. And it's because of this that de facto, the provinces of the Earth Kingdom are essentially independent states that I think are only nominally part of the Earth Kingdom. This is true to the extent that Omashu, one of its provinces, has its own king, Bumi, a title that would not usually be tolerated in a cohesive monarchy. It's the Earth King. He's over there. He's also over there, but that one has hard candy.
Delicious!
that there may be a reason that Omashu in particular has its own king, because we know that other provinces are typically run by governors. Omashu was placed in the middle of the Kolau Mountains and on the western side of the Siwong Desert. It would be next to impossible to sustain a siege in the arid climate, let alone bring forces down from the north to attack it. That is unlike the Fire Nation, who can bring fresh troops in with a powerful navy from the south. That natural defensive position gives them a unique advantage. If Ba Sing Se tried to get rid of their monarchy, then they may just secede from the Earth Kingdom, and what would they do about it? It's also curious to note the mountain range that dominates the eastern border of the northwest provinces, creating a natural barrier between them and Ba Sing Se. There is a pass through the middle of them though, near Taku, which would explain why the Fire Nation built the Pohau fortress we see in the Blue Spirit episode, to control the main access way to their conquered territory, and forcing the Earth Kingdom into a bottleneck if they ever tried to take it back. Now on the one hand, independence is a fantastic thing. There's a reason that federalism took off in our world, but it can also lead to situations where the central authority is unable to intervene, or in worst cases, doesn't care to. We actually see this in the episode Zuko Alone.
Those men should be ashamed to wear Earth Kingdom uniforms.
The real soldiers are off fighting the war.
You're bullies. Freeloaders abusing your power. Mostly over women and kids.
Damn, that episode was fantastic. I really want to do a breakdown of that and the Southern Raiders. What remains true is that these natural impenetrable barriers, most notably the Siwong Desert, represent a place that the Earth King cannot exert force in a meaningful way, meaning that there are whole peoples who live there that don't really count themselves as citizens of the Earth Kingdom, like the Sandbenders. So with this geographical layout, the question becomes, what is the role of the central government in the Earth Kingdom? We know that...
Well, technically, the Earth Queen has a right to conscript her citizens.
And we know that it collects taxes from all of its provinces, which means it must offer something in return. If it didn't, then it would be the 47th Peasant Uprising, and I'm not even kidding, there have been 46 peasant uprisings in Ba Sing Se alone in Earth Kingdom history. On another note, no peasants such as ourselves have ever revolted against Supreme Leader Mishka. He's the perfect fascist. All hail Mishka. Either way, we know that there is a centralized military force under the Council of Five that we meet in Ba Sing Se, but it doesn't seem to do many other things on a nationwide scale. It may only be responsible for security. A libertarian's dream. Though this may have been exaggerated during the 100-Year War period where they needed kind of that unified military force. Prior to that, we don't really know. It's possible that much of its collected wealth was put straight back into Ba Sing Se, maintaining its walls, maintaining its roads, it's building up its infrastructure, things like that. Which would make sense, because we know that Ba Sing Se is well ahead of much of the Earth Kingdom, which is relatively poor. Because of its geography, the Earth Kingdom government operates on the highest degree possible of decentralized power, whilst maintaining the minimum required for nationwide cohesion. Control of security. This would explain why the fall of Ba Sing Se meant the fall of the entire Earth Kingdom. Its command structure would have been entirely based within Ba Sing Se. If the whole kingdom wasn't centrally controlled from there, then the other provinces would have continued to fight far more than they did after the Season 2 finale. In effect, the geography of the Earth Kingdom, from its size to the Siwong Desert to its mountain ranges, makes it impossible for the Earth Monarch to exert any real influence, any huge amount of influence, over its provinces. If Ba Sing Se did try to become a dominant power, then it would likely be met with resistance, and even secession that it couldn't stop. This is never clearer than in Chin the Conqueror's campaign. During the reign of the 46th Earth King, Ba Sing Se tried to extend its power, to overtax its citizens, and probably set laws down to be enforced across the entire kingdom. Surprise, surprise, people don't like that, and so they revolted under Chin the Great, or Conqueror, depending on what you think. And the Earth King was powerless to stop him, as he essentially took over all of the Earth Kingdom except Ba Sing Se. But let's talk about something even more interesting. Economics. My father would be proud of me. We know that Ba Sing Se was built atop the crystal catacombs of Old Ba Sing Se. We see this in the Crossroads of Destiny.
In the crystal catacombs of Old Ba Sing Se, deep beneath the palace.
Well, what do you know? There is an ancient city down there, but it's deep.
And this particular geographical feature is much more important than many would realize. Cities are usually built around water sources, be it rivers or lakes or the ocean. That's why most people tend to live on the coast. But Ba Sing Se is curiously in the heartland of the continent, with only a small river flowing into Lake Laogai in the outer ring. But this underground feature may mean that Ba Sing Se doesn't need to rely on the ocean or lakes or rivers, because it seems like old Ba Sing Se was built around an underground aquifer. Think of it like a huge body of fresh water beneath the earth. For earthbenders, this would be easy to tap into and use. But it's notable that the city with a population the size of Ba Sing Se requires a huge amount of food, and by all indications, this food is grown inside the city. It doesn't get brought in. When both Aang and Korra enter Ba Sing Se, we see the vast amount of land that is dedicated purely to crop production, much of which would have been rice, a crop easy to cultivate, and hence why it's a staple of the Earth Kingdom diet. Ba Sing Se has a horde of flat land to use, but more importantly, its climate allows for a rare agricultural benefit known as multiple cropping, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. The climate allows for 2 or more harvests per year instead of the usual one, which gives Ba Sing Se a huge advantage in food production, without which the Earth Kingdom definitely wouldn't have become the most populous nation, and without which I don't think the provinces would have been united under the banner of the Earth Kingdom. And I'll explain why in a bit. But first, there's this complex economical agricultural equation where if you get more food, it equals, and hear me out, more babies. And who doesn't want more babies? But multiple cropping typically requires a huge amount of water, and we can see in the establishing shots of the show, right outside the outer wall, there is an arid desert, meaning that this fertile land is likely to be man-made. Multiple cropping only really became possible and widespread in Asia after the Green Revolution, which was where they learned how to use water incredibly efficiently. Likewise, Ba Sing Se would have gone through a similar revolution when they managed to learn how to channel the masses of water from their underground aquifer into their fields. And if this is where mass population for the Earth Kingdom began because of its aquifer and its climate, then that would explain why Ba Sing Se is the capital province, with the highest food production and population becomes the largest and most well-resourced military. And with that, they would have eventually been able to draw the provinces together under their banner as the Earth Kingdom. Also, I want to touch on the Siwong Desert again, because coupled with the lack of central enforcement and the natural impenetrable barrier that it creates between the north and the south, we see that the south becomes a hub for criminal activity, trading illegal wares, and its settlements acting as meeting hubs for bounty hunters and the like, as we see in the Misty Palms and other desert towns. Another geographical to consider are the eastern and western lakes, which create another natural barrier between the north and the south, as well as between Ba Sing Se and the west. But these lakes also create a central point of trade for the Earth Kingdom, as towns line up around their edges, much like the Mediterranean, and this may be a factor in the political cohesion of the Earth Kingdom. So peoples who are heavily integrated via trade tend to be more politically involved with one another as well, and historically, trade links have led to political cohesion, because they avoid war between those different people groups. For example, the United States. They're more like a bunch of free trading nations, but they're so integrated that they need one another. They can't afford to go to war against each other. Likewise, the common market in Europe was partially invented as a war deterrent. It's likely that the trade across the eastern and western lakes have helped maintain the Earth Kingdom as it is. And finally, I want to talk about how the geography influenced the Fire Nation's strategy during the 100-Year War. The Fire Lord's immediate goal was to bring down the Earth Kingdom, the only nation that could really challenge it militarily and economically, as Katara says.
But they pretty much won the war when they took Ba Sing Se.
The fact that so much of their economy and military is concentrated in that one area makes it the king on the chessboard. Arguably, a smarter strategy would have been to take the south of the Earth Kingdom in a blitzkrieg attack. With the Siwong Desert between them, they would have had a natural buffer. With the area subjugated, they would then be free to blockade the eastern lake and land an army of troops on Ba Sing Se's doorstep. But instead, they focused on the western front. The reason for this, I think, is resources. The Fire Nation needed resources to sustain their attack, and we can see from the likes of Makabu Village and Taku, which were built in a fashion notably more wealthy than other places in the Earth Kingdom, and Taku was one of the central trading posts for the Earth Kingdom, that the northwestern territories, covered in dense forest, mining reserves, and metal deposit that they would need for ships, attacking there was a far better target for a long-term strategy, and they had no guarantee that Ba Sing Se would fall on their first assault. They needed to wear it down first. Avatar integrated every element of its world building with one another, and this was just a fun little study to show how deep that really went, how complex the Earth Kingdom was, and how much of that arose from its geography, because geography really does influence how you build your fictional world. But that is all from me. If you would like to suggest your own video topic, be it Avatar, Lord of the Rings, Elder Scrolls, whatever you like, then come support me on Patreon and we can talk about that. Really would mean the world. And if you enjoyed this, because it's going to take me a long time to edit, then please do. Question of the day: how would you conquer the world from your country? As in, what would be your strategy? Let me know down in the comments below. In the meantime, I'd love if you come follow me over on Twitter, Facebook, email me stuff that you've made in the address and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, sub-viewers, and I will see you in the future.